Good afternoon. Welcome to the Kentucky edition of our state webinar series exploring the findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat, the State of the States report. Before we get started, let me run through some logistics to help make this a good experience. Everyone has been muted, so no need to do that yourself. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen. The orange arrow at the top of that panel allows the panel to shrink and reopen. You'll see a question section in the control panel. You can pop that section out by clicking on the little square on the right-hand side of it. That decouples it from the control panel and allows you to type your question or comment into it. We will allow plenty of time for questions during and at the end of the presentation. We are recording this webinar and we'll send out the link to that to everybody who registered. Please feel free to share this recording with others. So let me now introduce myself. I am Chris Coffin. I'm American Farmland Trust's Senior Policy Advisor. I also direct our newly launched National Agricultural Land Network, which I'll talk about at the end of the webinar. Co-hosting with me is Billy Van Pelt. I suspect that Billy is well known to many of you on this webinar. Billy is our Senior Director for External Relations and is based here in Kentucky. For those of you not familiar with American Farmland Trust, let me do a quick introduction. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. We work to save the land that sustains us by protecting farmland, promoting sound farming practices, and importantly, keeping farmers on the land. Some know us best by our No Farms, No Food bumper sticker. We work from kitchen tables to the halls of Congress, from farmland protection projects to soil health initiatives to land access trainings, to state and federal policy development and advocacy. We have 6 regional offices and a national office located in Washington, D.C. So let me now turn it over to Billy.
Thanks, Chris. We are delighted to be joined today by a number of valued partners, including Fayette County Farm Bureau, Fayette Alliance, the Organic Association of Kentucky, Equine Land Conservation Resource, staff from the Kentucky Department of Agriculture, staff from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service. We'd like to recognize and thank NRCS especially for their collaboration in support of this project. They've been an integral partner, as has our research partner in this project, Conservation Science Partners. And now I would like to welcome a very special guest, Keith Rogers, who is here on behalf of Commissioner of Agriculture Ryan Quarles and is representing the Kentucky Department of Agriculture. Mr. Rogers, we are delighted to have you with us. We thought we might ask you a few questions. First, why should Kentucky residents care about the loss of farmland?
Well, thank you, Billy and Chris. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all this afternoon and for a very important introduction to what the work that you all have done in the study and the information that you have. To directly answer your question, Kentucky has long cared, agriculture farmers, others in Kentucky agriculture have long cared for the farmland. This is the home of no-till. I mean, no-till was born in Christian County, Kentucky. And I mean, it's been a part of our heritage in Kentucky for a long time to take care of farmland and to be conservationist. I know for a long time I've had a poster hanging in my office that says farmers, the original environmentalist. And I think that goes a long way in saying what Kentucky's values are when it comes to protecting our farmland. We have seen in Kentucky, though, over the last several decades, a loss of that farmland. That is troublesome to many of us who have agriculture as our main career and our passion and what we work on every day. But for the citizens of Kentucky, the loss of farmland, I think, really comes around to the loss of the environment, the loss of that economic opportunity that farmland can provide. One of the things that I'm so happy that American Farmland Trust has worked on for years, and along with this effort, is to educate. And I think that's one of the biggest keys that we need to be doing in Kentucky, is to educate both our urban and rural folks about the effects of loss of farmland and what that can do to our rural economies, and what that can do to our environment, and what that can do to our food production going forward. So, you know, we're all in this together, so to speak, from the standpoint of food and being able to both supply that food that the farmers produce, but also to protect that asset, that great asset that we have in the United States of being able to feed ourselves in a good portion of the world. And so, you know, citizens need to be concerned about that, but I think it's our job to help educate them as to why.
Well, thank you. How might this report inform the work of the Department of Agriculture?
Well, at the Department of Agriculture, of course, we're very pleased to be the host of the PACE program in Kentucky and that PACE board, a program that is now in place. I'm trying to quickly remember, 20 plus years. I guess we're approaching 25 now. And, you know, it's a program that has made a lot of difference in Kentucky, especially in central Kentucky around the Lexington area. But anytime that you have, as I said earlier, information, education, things that you can educate our policymakers, whether that's a legislature member or a local official, anything that we can help use to help educate them about the effects of the loss of farmland or the effects that may have on agriculture is good. And so I would envision that we will be using this information, especially over the next couple, 3 years, to help tell the story of why agriculture in rural Kentucky is important and why we need to have policies, those that we have in place now and those that we need to seriously look at to put those policies in place in a way that that we can inform, educate, and motivate policymakers at all levels that this is an important topic. So that's how we'll use it.
Well, thank you. And lastly, how can Kentucky stakeholders statewide help to generate support for the suggested actions in the report?
Well, first of all, I think it goes right back to education. Taking this report, making sure that it's widely distributed among our agricultural organizations and our agricultural leaders in Kentucky, I think is critical. This is the kind of information that oftentimes we kind of put on that back burner when we have an export-import issue or a processing issue, as we've had in recent months with COVID-19. Those kind of come to the front and center, and those are the urgent things that we have to work with on a daily basis. Oftentimes, reports like this and policies like this oftentimes are not maybe the urgent issue of the day, and therefore don't get the attention that they need. I think this is a tool that will allow us to have that information readily available, where we can quickly respond, quickly help policymakers understand the benefits of the policy or of the education. And so I think going forward, this is going to be a very, very handy tool in the coming years to educate, to generate support, and to help advance the protection of farmland in Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Rogers. We greatly appreciate your willingness to be here with us today, and we appreciate all that you, Commissioner Quarles, and others at the Department of Agriculture have done and continue to do to support agriculture and the agricultural land base here in Kentucky.
Thank you.
Thanks, Billy, and thank you, Mr. Rogers. And we are very grateful for you being with us today, and we hope that you will stay with us and help us answer any questions that we might get and get your thoughts at the end. But let's now start to talk about the findings from our Farms Under Threat report. Today, we're focusing on the State of the States, which is the second in this research series. State of the States paints a striking picture of the threats facing working farms and ranches in every state, and documents the steps every state has taken to protect their agricultural land base from development. We used a multi-pronged approach that included advanced spatial mapping to identify the threats to the agricultural land base and an in-depth analysis of state policy responses. We're using this report to raise public awareness, to inform state and federal policy, and to encourage more direct and permanent agricultural land protection. For those of you who did not join us last month, let me touch very quickly on our national findings. From 2001 to 2016, a period of historically low housing starts, the U.S. converted 11 million acres of agricultural land. That's equivalent to all the land planted in the U.S. to fruits, nuts, and vegetables in 2017. The majority of that conversion was to low-density residential land use. We've known this type of conversion was happening because all across the country, scattered large lot housing has been fragmenting and disrupting farming and ranching for years. But until this report, no one has ever been able to map it and measure it. And once we mapped it, we realized just how big of a threat it is. And importantly, more than a third of the land converted, about 4.5 million acres, was what we have identified through this project as nationally significant land. That's land best suited for intensive food and crop production. So as you can see from this next map, agricultural land conversion is a growing problem across the U.S. and no longer confined to large metropolitan areas. Small cities are sprawling, and the proliferation of farmettes and ranchettes on their outskirts has created hotspots of conversion in virtually every state. So now we're going to switch to an interactive website where we're going to dive into the data available for Kentucky. Billy and I will be assisted in that today by our colleague Beth Fraser, who will be our website navigator. So let's start with pointing out the Reports and Data tab over here on the right. This is where you'll find the fact sheets that describe the methodology for much of this report. And if you're interested in getting access to the geospatial data we used, we will be making that available probably starting in July. If you would like it, go where you see the pointer is to that geospatial data layers tab. If you click on that, you'll find a form that allows you to request the data when available. So let's now go to the drop-down menu and select Kentucky. And here you will find both the spatial mapping data and the policy scorecard data. We're going to start with the spatial data. And Beth, if you can take a minute to point out the Kentucky conversion summary. We created for both the, and if you would, excellent. We created for both the spatial data and for the policy highlights, these 2-page PDF downloadable infographic laden sheets that we hope will be useful for everyone on this call to use with their continued outreach, as Mr. Rogers was talking about, the education and engagement form. This has a lot of useful information. It's useful for policymakers. It's useful for members of organizations. So we hope that you see this as a resource and make use of it. So now let's go back to the website and look at the 4 categories of spatial data we've created. We're going to start with land cover and use. You see over these up here, right? Farms Under Threat, the State of the States, uses multiple national data sets to develop the best available spatial inventory of agricultural land use in the U.S. You can zoom in on this data layer to identify every type of land use in the state, including land that we've identified as low-density residential development. It also includes a first-ever attempt to spatially identify woodland associated with a farm or ranch. Our mapping shows about 12.3 million acres of agricultural land in the state, including just under 5 million acres of cropland, about 4 million acres of pasture, and 3.2 million acres of that woodland associated with a farm. So let's go to PVR values next. For farms under threat, we wanted to analyze the quality of land that is being lost to development, not just the quantity. So we created, with the help of a national panel of experts, an index to quantify the productivity, versatility, and resiliency of every acre of land in the US. This map shows the range of these PVR values across the state. You can see the darker the green, the higher the PVR value, and the higher the PVR value indicates the higher the suitability for long-term intensive crop production, especially for food crops such as fruits, nuts, vegetables, and staple grains. Beth, can you take a minute and show how you toggle back and forth between map and satellite? It's sometimes easier to see here on this map in terms of the color. They sort of show, you're seeing some forest land in the background, but you can get a better sense of the areas in the darker greens being the most productive PVR values here. And we'll be able to see it more readily on the next map, which is the nationally significant land. So again, this nationally significant land is land that we've identified as the most suitable. It's at that top spectrum of the PVR values. So it's the most suitable for long-term intensive crop production. There are about 5,690,000 acres of ag land in Kentucky that falls into this category, which is about 46% of the state's agricultural land base. Majority of it, about 4 million acres of it, is cropland, with another 1.1 million acres of pasture and about 500,000 acres in woodland. And so again, what you're looking here at the screen is the dark, this is all land that's considered nationally significant. And again, Beth, if you want to go to satellite to show what it looks like when you do that, you can, again, you see these green, right, what's being circled here is the nationally significant land, and you can, again, get a better sense of it on top of the topography of parts of the state. So we hope that this will be helpful again for you as you zoom in on a much closer basis to the parts of the state that you are especially interested in. So we're going last to conversion. The data from this report looks at a 15-year period from 2001 to 2016, again, a period of historically low housing starts with a recession in the middle of them. We mapped the conversion of agricultural land to two types of land use. The first is urban and highly developed land, or UHD. This includes the traditional culprits in farmland conversion, so expanding residential, commercial, and industrial areas typically found in cities and towns. But this category also includes rural, industrial, and energy production sites, so that you will see oil and well pads and solar panel installations in this UHD as well. The second type is low density residential development, or what we've called LDR. Again, this is the first effort of its kind to quantify the extent of large lot housing on the agricultural land base. LDR areas range from lower density subdivisions to rural areas where more and more individual houses are being built. You can see that the vast majority of conversions, so 205,000 acres, my apologies, or about 84% of the conversion over this time frame was to LDR. An important point to make here, it doesn't mean that there's no active agriculture on the land designated as LDR. There may well be, and some of that agriculture may be highly productive and profitable. But we know that LDR tends to be a transitional land use. Land in Kentucky that was considered LDR in 2001 was 14 times more likely to be converted to urban and highly developed land by 2016 than other agricultural land. And we know that continued conversion to LDR increases management challenges for producers who have to deal with farming in and around non-farm neighbors. Total agricultural land converted over this period was 265,300 acres. Of this, pasture land was most converted, followed pretty closely by cropland, then woodland. Sadly, almost half of the land converted in this short time frame was nationally significant land. The loss of this land in particular has economic and environmental implications. When this highly productive, versatile, and resilient land is impacted by development, intensive food production is pushed to more marginal lands where input costs are typically higher, crop yields are typically lower, and soils degrade much more quickly. So that's a brief look at the findings. And with that, I'm going to stop and turn it over to Billy for some perspectives on these spatial findings.
Thank you, Chris. Beth, would you show the PVR map, please? So I think this map is very telling. We have amazing soils in Kentucky. What you see is a full range of soils across Kentucky, from high PVR to moderate to low. And Keith earlier was mentioning Fayette County and the success of the efforts of farmland protection in that area. And you can see the urban services boundary carved out there with the rural service area going around the urban area. Beth, if you could convert this to the land conversion map, please. So this map begins to tell a story of the proliferation of urban uses and low density residential uses, where you see the conversion, and we see a trend here that we have seen in other states, and that's where low density residential starts to expand, and you see cities that are beginning to merge, smaller communities that are beginning to merge. And again, this is not only a trend in Kentucky, we're seeing it in other states across the nation. So, and now, Beth, if you could take us to the overall map, please. So here's the map that really tells the story. You can see the very dark brown as our urban uses, the orange color as the low density residential, and then our PVR soils that you're seeing there, the green colors, our cropland and pasture land. So again, we can see the proliferation of low density residential, and I think Chris summed it up very well. The large non-agricultural units, the McMansions, the 5-acre lots, the 10-acre lots, the 15-acre lots, and subdivisions that may have existed from the 50s and 60s, the large lot, half-acre and 1-acre subdivisions as well. So I'll speak a little bit about the tools in the toolkit later on in the presentation. Chris, I'll turn it back over to you.
Great, thank you, Billy. Before we turn to the policy scorecard, we want to stop and get some input from all of you. We're interested in your perspectives on what you think will drive agricultural land conversion over the next 10 to 20 years in Kentucky. Understanding this will help determine what policy responses will be most important. So here you see the poll. You're welcome to vote for more than one. If you think that there's another driver that we haven't listed, please feel free to write it in on the question as a question. If you are having trouble voting for some reason, it might be because you're in full screen mode and you need to come out of that mode in order to be able to vote. So we'll give it a minute for everyone to take a chance to vote. Great. So thanks. Well, I will say this is completely consistent with the webinars that we have done in other states, that you all have said the same thing that we have consistently heard is what people feel are the two and actually the three top drivers, which is more and poorly planned housing, commercial, industrial development, followed by, again, this fear about what's happening to the land base as it transfers between generations, and will there actually be a next generation that can get onto the land? And then third, still concerns about the profitability of agriculture, because we know that profitability is what drives, in large part, what happens on that agricultural land base. So we know that we need to focus on all of these in particular, and that takes us into the policy scorecard. So turning to it, our intention with the scorecard is to highlight effective elements of state policies that address these drivers of agricultural land conversion. So historically, it's been poorly planned development, weak ag viability, and this vulnerability of land as it transfers between generations. While AFT has been at the forefront of federal and state policy development around ag land retention and protection since 1980, this is our first effort at a state policy scorecard. We know that there are many ways that states support agriculture, and this is not an attempt to score all of them. Kentucky, like other states, have many great programs, some that are focused on marketing, some on supporting the business of agriculture in many different kind of ways. What we wanted to do with this scorecard is to focus on 6 different types of policies and programs that tie directly to the land in some way or another. So they include the purchase of agricultural conservation easement programs. These are often known as purchase of development rights programs or farmland preservation programs. They are voluntary programs that compensate landowners who choose to place an ag conservation easement on their property. In Kentucky, this is the purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easement Corporation, affiliated with the State Department of Agriculture that Keith mentioned at the beginning. Second is land use planning and growth management. We understand that land use planning is driven largely at the county and municipal level in Kentucky as elsewhere, and the suite of tools available to those county and local governments to support compact development and to protect agricultural land must be robust and allow for innovation. Billy's going to talk a little bit more about that later. So our intent with this piece of the scorecard is to look at how every state government is steering or supporting those county and local decisions in a way that supports the agricultural land base. We looked then at property tax relief. So these are programs that reduce property taxes paid on ag land in recognition that working lands require far less in municipal services than residential development. They may be called current use or agricultural use or preferential use assessment. We looked at agricultural district programs. So these programs typically encourage landowners to form special areas to support agriculture. Farmers in districts tend to receive a bundle of protections and benefits depending on the state program. We then looked at 2 last types of programs that address that generational transfer and land access. One are farm link programs, which connect farm seekers with farmers and landowners who want their land to stay in agriculture. These are often administered by public or private entities, and they offer a range of services and resources from online real estate postings to technical assistance, trainings, and educational resources. We included in this scorecard only those state-supported programs. And lastly, state leasing. Many states make state-owned land available to farmers and ranchers for agriculture. Often that agricultural use is secondary to generating income for a public purpose or protecting wildlife habitat. And we wanted to look at how supportive some of these leasing programs were for farmers and ranchers. So going down, you can see how Kentucky scored relative to other states. about median for PACE and just below median for planning, ag districts, and state leasing. And then a low score on the property tax relief measure. So the website allows you to dive into the factors behind the score. So let's go to the Select Policy or Program tab and see the drop-down menu. So let's start with looking at PACE. And you will see when we get to the Kentucky line that Kentucky does well in a number of categories. And it has certainly been a pretty robust program for many years. And the state was innovative back in its time in creating this program. It gets points for including an affirmative farming clause in its easements, which we feel is very important. States with higher scores than Kentucky tend to have a higher average funds spent per capita, as you can see in one of those lines. Since 1984, when the program was established, Kentucky's average has been about 13 cents per capita, while that number is often several dollars per capita for the highest scoring states. Before we leave this, I want to mention the importance of the Federal Agricultural Conservation Easement Program here, which provides a one-to-one match of federal funds, which makes it a terrific farmland protection partner. We hope that the $2 billion in funding and changes made to the program in the 2018 Farm Bill, including the elimination of the cash match requirement, will continue to improve its utility for farmland protection in Kentucky. So let's now go to land use planning. And Kentucky here gets points for requiring the adoption of a local comprehensive, Kentucky gets points for requiring the adoption of a local comprehensive plan in order to enact zoning and subdivision regulations, and for having a state plan for agriculture. Higher scoring states provide support for planning, either around comp plans or farmland protection planning specifically, and some require consistency with state goals around agricultural land protection and or compact development. Looking quickly at property tax relief, which in Kentucky is through the Agricultural and Horticultural Use Act. Many programs around the country require verification that land is in active agricultural use in order to be eligible. They also impose withdrawal penalties or fees if that land is taken out of agricultural use. Some states use those withdrawal fees as a way to fund their PACE programs. So we have 2 more to go on agricultural districts. Kentucky gets points for its program in that, and this is very important, that it prohibits annexation of agricultural land by municipalities. District programs can also be used to limit the use of eminent domain and protect from the siting of public facilities and infrastructure. Less common but used in some states for districts is requiring district enrollment to participate in state administered PACE programs. And then lastly, on state leasing, it appears that Kentucky's leasing is primarily done through the Department of Fish and Wildlife, which manages leases on a limited amount of land within wildlife management areas. States that received high scores in this category have done a comprehensive inventory of state-owned land that could be made suitable for farming, and then promote the use of that land through a transparent process. We feel that this is an important mechanism for identifying new land access opportunities, especially smaller plot parcels in and near urban areas. I want lastly to point out one policy innovation that is not included in our scorecard, and this is Kentucky's selling farmer tax credit that was established last year. We didn't include tax credits in this scorecard as there were only a handful of states that have them, but we applaud Kentucky for setting this great example of a way that states can support the transition of farmland from one generation to the next, and we look forward to learning more about how well this program works over the next few years, as it's an example as we would like to see other states follow. So I hope that was a helpful cruise through the findings. If you have questions, please do write them down now. And as we go out of the website, we're going to launch a poll which asks which policy or policies you think would be most valuable to focus on for Kentucky. Again, you can do more than one if you like. And we apologize for not being able to fit state leasing and farm link in there. If you feel like those are the most important to focus on, please write them in the question line. Great, thanks. So looking at that, land use planning, number one, and it's good that Billy's going to talk about tools available. Property tax relief, what more can be done there does seem to be a valuable focus of attention, because we do think that these programs with not very significant tweaks can be slightly more valuable and for agricultural land protection and retention. The National Agricultural Land Network will be hosting a series of policy webinars beginning in early fall, which we hope will be a way for those of you who want to learn more specifically about many of these policy elements. So stay tuned for that. So going back to our PowerPoint, one thing missing from our spatial analysis is protected agricultural land, because there's not a comprehensive data layer, national data layer, focused on agricultural land protection specifically. We're building this new database now. If you have not heard from us and you are an entity that holds agricultural easements, please let us know by adding a comment in the question panel, and we will be in touch with you. It is good to see that there is some good green there in Kentucky. So let's stop. Now, Billy has been looking at the questions, and let's take some if there are any, Billy.
Thanks, Chris. We do have a question about FarmLink. So in FarmLink programs, I'm going to provide some detail here, and Chris, please add at the end of my comments. FarmLink programs connect land seekers with landowners who want their land to stay in agriculture. They're administered by public or private entities, and they offer a range of services and resources, from online real estate postings to technical assistance, trainings, and educational resources.
Right, and so thanks, Billy. I think it's important to think about the range of things that states can do and that state support can do. We don't necessarily feel that every state has to have a FarmLink program if there's particularly like already robust FarmLink programs being operated by nonprofits. But we do think that having state support of these types of programs, and particularly a state focus on it, is very helpful. And these can be modest. These can be modest efforts that are creating an online platform where, again, you have farm seekers who can say what kind of land they are looking for, and you can have those who have land who are looking to sell or looking to lease, who can be listing their properties, and that way, so the sort of minimal version is then you have the seekers and the landowners who can find each other online. The more robust types of programs are really trying to help folks match those seekers with those landowners who are looking to sell or lease their land. And one way that I know that some states have thought about doing it is to do it through at least their protected agricultural land, and to talk to the owners of that protected land to make it known that they could get help in trying to find a farm seeker who is looking either for a lease opportunity or to purchase land, and connecting them in that way. So there are a number of different ways that it can be done, and we just think that it's important to provide those opportunities to try and I think this will be, maybe it's a way in Kentucky of thinking about matching it with the selling farmers tax credit, that it is, there, ideally to make that program be as successful as possible, a little bit of help in educating landowners that tax credit is available, and helping in some way to help them find folks who are interested in the purchase of that land. That might be a good place for Kentucky to consider starting.
All right. Well, if we could go to our next slide, please. Time is not on our side in saving farm and ranch land, which is why AFT just announced a bold goal of doubling the amount of permanently protected farmland by 2040 and reducing the rate of farmland conversion from 2,000 acres a day to 500 acres a day by 2040. So this would be a drastic reduction in farmland conversion. We know that we can get to this goal, and we all need to lock arms with as many partners and practitioners on this call and others around the U.S. who are deeply concerned about saving the land that sustains us. And this goal aligns perfectly with phase 3 of our Farms Under Threat report, because phase 3 will project forward to 2040. Phase 1, which was released in May of 2018, was a historic look back. Phase 2, the phase that we're talking about now, State of the States, is where we are. And phase 3 will project out to 2040. And you'll be hearing more about that in the coming months. Right now, I'd like to focus on the ways that AFT will be strengthening its commitment to farmland protection. As Chris mentioned, we'll be establishing the National Agricultural Land Network, providing new leadership in key locations. American Farmland Trust is using our research and data to inform where we are going to be locating 2 new offices in the Southeast. You'll be hearing more about one of those offices in the very near future. Protecting more farmland ourselves and with partners. American Farmland Trust is a land trust, and we do hold conservation easements only if there is not a viable partner in place. We will be advocating for stronger state and federal policies, along with everyone that's on this call, and promoting research-based decision-making. Mr. Rogers touched on this earlier, using our research to inform planning for the future of agriculture. And now, here are some things that we think Kentucky can do. Analyzing and mapping agricultural land trends and conditions, strengthening or adopting a coordinated suite of policies. So this is what Chris was referencing earlier that I was going to be talking about. What we're referring to here are the tools in the toolkit. They include, for communities and cities across Kentucky, and across cities across the United States, frankly, urban growth boundaries, agricultural zoning outside of those boundaries, larger lot minimums. So we don't have low density residential development. We don't have the non-agricultural units that are fragmenting the rural landscape, the 5, the 10, the 15, the 20 acre tracts that make it very challenging to have the critical mass of farmland needed for agriculture. We also need farmland protection programs such as the state PACE program, Lexington and Scott County's purchase of development rights programs, and the Bluegrass Land Conservancy, which is a large land trust that stretches across Kentucky. Also, cost of community services studies have proven, in fact, over 80 times in our studies that we've done across the nation, agriculture uses less in services than it pays in taxes. Sprawl uses more in services than it pays in taxes, and your core urban areas are also using less in services than it pays in taxes. Even though the agriculture is creating a net gain on the tax dollar, it's not enough to subsidize sprawl. So sprawl is literally an unsustainable model financially and environmentally. These policies lead to vibrant downtowns. We're seeing this in communities that have planned for the future of agriculture. Downtowns actually become more vibrant. There's more of an inward focus on more livability and walkability. But also, the next point, planning for agriculture, not just around it. We are planning for the factory floor of agriculture. In Kentucky, $5.7 billion from cash farm receipts. Also, $2.1 billion in agricultural exports. 125,000 producers, 63,000 farm laborers. So our farmland is our factory floor. We want to save the best, but not forget the rest. And so it's about embedding goals in every comprehensive plan in Kentucky, so that every comprehensive plan in Kentucky has a goal for farmland protection in that county.
Thank you, Billy, for that. That was terrific. So we are going to spend a little bit of time now talking about the Farmland Information Center and the National Agricultural Land Network, but let me just check if there are any other questions, and not seeing any right now. Let me continue on, and if people have other comments even, please feel free to write them in. So the Farmland Information Center is a collaboration that we have had with USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for a couple of decades now. It is both a website and a technical assistance center where we answer questions of all kinds from a diversity of audiences, and you can find the email address or submit a question through that farmlandinfo.org website or by that telephone number. The resources range from information for farmers, ranchers, and landowners if they want to know what is an agricultural conservation easement. If there's not a local land trust or somebody who has got information at the ready, you can send folks to that to the FIC, as we call it. There is also a great fact sheet that will be going up, and a lot of materials going up on the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, including one that is focused specifically on landowners or what they can expect if they want to sell an easement using some of that federal funding. There is a lot of information for those who are looking for state policies, who are looking for information, and again, useful things that can be made to help make the case for farm and ranch land protection. We have many studies about the economics of farmland protection. We have information on those costs of community services that Billy was talking about. So it's a wealth of resources, and I would encourage everybody to go to it and take a look to see the sheer volume of resources that are available. And since it is a sheer volume, being able to ask a question helps a lot, and we are very quick to answer those questions. So please consider that as a resource. Thisfarmland.org, Farms Under Threat, is the URL for this interactive website. We hope you will go to that. And before I get into talking about the network, let's launch our third poll, because the network, and I'm going to talk at it as we have this poll launching, this is looking for what kind of technical assistance you would find helpful in addressing this challenge around agricultural land conversion, because it is our plan with the network, our intent with the network, to build the collective capacity of all of us working in the agricultural land planning, it's both planning and protection space, as a way to learn from each other. So this is intended to be part peer networking and information sharing, but to be providing basic training as well. So you can see some of the assistance that we are thinking about offering. Again, I mentioned that we are going to be holding these deep dives into some state policy tools that people might find useful to focus on for various states. But we are interested not just in helping folks to be able to have more robust farmland protection efforts, but how do we collectively make that case, as Mr. Rogers was talking about? What type of research do we need to do? What type of materials do we need to create to do that? And we also need to understand how agricultural land protection works in connection with many other goals, and those might be goals around land access, and they might be goals around climate change mitigation, and they might be goals around soil health. So again, we see that there's a lot of connections. A lot of land trusts and state agencies are doing some innovative work, and we want to help coordinate and lift up many of these efforts. So it's useful. Thank you for your input here on the land use planning tools. That is something that we just talked about this morning, about that we will be providing more resources around that, and around creating agricultural land protection plans. We do hope that having this data will make it possible for folks to do it themselves, but we also will be providing likely some training that would help folks to create more plans at the local level. So let me stop there. Let me just actually mention that the network is a membership network. So if you are engaged, if you and your agency or organization are engaged in that ag land protection or planning in any way, you can be a member. If you are someone who focuses on this, not directly engaged in either planning or protection, but an advocate for those types of things, you can be a collaborator. More information can be found on that through our website, or feel free to reach out to me, and my email is right there. So let me stop there and turn it back to both Mr. Rogers for any last thoughts, and then for Billy to wrap up.
Thank you, Chris, and very impressive work. Very, very helpful information. As I looked through it this morning, the copies that Billy sent me earlier, I was impressed by the detail and the information that will be, as I said earlier, very helpful in educating both our urban friends and our agricultural colleagues. And so, thank you all so much for doing this, and we look forward to continuing the efforts and work with American Farmland Trust as we work to advance Kentucky agriculture. And I'll just leave one last closing remark, and that is that, you know, when we're profitable in agriculture and the resources are there, that's when farmers are best at protecting the farmland. And that's one of the things that we work at KDA every day to do, is to improve, improve marketing, improve prices, improve the ability for our Kentucky farm families to make a living. And ultimately, you know, achieving those goals will help accomplish the goals that you all are working on. So thank you all very much for today.
Thank you, Keith. As Chris mentioned, I am based here in Kentucky. My email address is bvanpelt@farmland.org. I'm happy to answer your questions and to provide you with additional resources. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you'd like to send me an invitation, I'd be happy to connect with you. So Chris, I'll turn it back to you.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Thank you, Billy. Thank you, everybody who took the time to listen to this. Please be in touch if you have questions, and we hope you have a great afternoon. Take care.